Lifebeats. Lifebeats with Sally Musa. Only on Pulse 95.
The historical and culturally rich city of Sharjah has kept its ancient culture and traditions alive by means of establishing a number of museums around the city. You probably have seen them. These museums depict the history of the Emirates in a spectacular way, which transports museum goers to a bygone era. Places like the Sharjah Museum of Islamic Civilization, Sharjah Art Museum, Sharjah Archaeology Museum, and many more are famous throughout the world. The museums in Sharjah are family-friendly destinations that can be enlightening, not just for the adults, but educational as well for the kids too. To tell us more about what we can expect at Sharjah Museums, if you've been there, let us know. We would love to hear from you. We are as well on YouTube. We are live as well. You can follow us there. But I'm so pleased right now to be welcoming into the Lifebeats studio Her Excellency, the Director General of Sharjah Museums Authority, Manal Ataya. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today.
So great to have you. Now, as the Director of Sharjah Museums, first of all, let's clear this up for everybody. How many museums are there?
Okay, so in the Emirate of Sharjah, there are technically 18 museums. They cover a wide range of topics and diverse collections. We at the Sharjah Museums Authority manage 16 of those, and 2 others are managed by the Environmental Protective Agency because they relate to the natural history of Sharjah. For us, with the 16 museums, we have our hands full, of course, with quite a lot of different objects and areas of interest, and they cover things such as archaeology, history, heritage, art, whether classic or contemporary, calligraphy, science, classic cars, aviation. So it's pretty diverse and exciting. I think for everyone out there will find something that will interest them.
It is quite amazing, the number of museums that there are and the number of things and interests and areas that they do cover. You need several trips to several museums to get through them all, and you learn something new every single time, which is wonderful. But tell me about why Sharjah has so many museums.
Well, that answer is relatively easy. So His Highness himself, as many know, is a historian at heart, and his PhDs were mainly in geographical history of this Gulf region. So he has always been a very avid promoter of history and heritage mainly, but also, of course, of culture and arts in general, because they're all really interconnected and related in essence. So over the years, he has collected different things of interest. First, Oriental paintings that were he thought were very interesting, and they are, because they depicted a lot of wonderful architectural features and landscapes of the Levant region and Egypt and other parts of North Africa, which were painted by a lot of people from Europe at the time. He also collected Islamic artifacts that he believed were very important to bring to Sharjah, again to talk about the importance of the Islamic values that we have in Sharjah, but in the UAE, of course, as a whole. But also heritage-related material and the restoration of heritage houses, and making sure that the history of Sharjah, the Qawasim tribe, and all that has happened in the past is documented, recorded, interpreted, and there for people to learn from. I mean, we have an aviation museum not just because we like planes, but because Sharjah was the first airport in 1932 of the UAE. So a lot of our different museums are specific because they have a direct connection to the history of Sharjah in itself. And of course, art is one of them. Calligraphy is huge as well as an Islamic art form. So that's where all the varieties happened. And as they grew, His Highness also was very aware that young children today need more access to informal learning environments, and that where they can learn outside the classroom and maybe learn topics that were not at that time introduced in schools was really important. So we really supplemented the education 20 so years ago, and we're continuing to do that actually in many places where kids are not getting some of the topics and subjects taught that we think that is important for them to learn.
And that experience within the museums then gets transported into the classroom as well, where it inspires a whole other way of exploring and learning as well. And then that brings in new subjects into schools as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, for example, for a good couple of years, we studied every single book of every grade level. I mean, literally page by page, to make sure that we could make those connections with the curriculum. And it was unbelievable how many connections they were. It wasn't difficult to do. It was actually like you can teach your entire syllabus of geography, for example, of 7th grade in 3 or 4 of our museums. We cover all of that depending on this topic or that. So teachers, would come to us at open teacher days. We would explain to them and show them how you can bring children to the museum and they will have a different experience, because there is a difference from learning from books in a classroom setting and then learning where you can actually visually see and have your other senses stimulated, because you're hearing stories, you're listening to someone tell you a story about the history of something or the geography of the area. You get to smell. We have often items in the museum that you can smell, to herbs and etc., and then see dioramas to really visualize how things might have been before, as well as see objects from that time. And I think that really can be something you remember more than maybe reading it in a book. I mean, I know personally, I'm just a visual learner. If I watch a documentary or watch a movie, I'll remember facts and data more than I would if I read it in a book. That's just the way I am. And I believe a lot of children learn in different ways. So it's important for them to have that variation.
Absolutely. I love that so much. But I want to kind of come to you and your story of how you became interested in art and culture, and it became not only a passion for you, but a mission, now as Director General of Sharjah Museums.
I've been asked that question often. I think by people who are not at all related in the arts field. They always ask, what took you to that sort of area of work, especially when I started, which was about 13 years ago now. And museums were still in their early stages being built in a lot of parts of the region. And there definitely weren't any programs for museum studies in this area. And I told a lot of people it was honestly something that when I was younger, at the age of 8 or 10, and I went to the Natural History Museum in London, I always remembered that experience. I felt really excited by what I saw, things I had never seen before. And
that's amazing, particularly the Natural History Museum, isn't it?
And particularly at that time I went to see the dinosaur exhibition, and it was the first time I saw sort of life-size dinosaurs moving, and I thought, my God, this is amazing. It's like, if this is what museums are, then I want to go to them as much as possible. And I did over time, but later, it was only later when I was about 19, 20, and I started studying art in college, because I always had an interest in art and I was a painter from a young age. I started to go to art museums, and then going to Paris and seeing art museums for the first time was a huge, had a huge impact on me. And I realized that I saw spaces where people could be creative, where people could think about things in a different way, where nobody told you, at least when I was there, nobody said what your answer or your idea for or your opinion about this is wrong. Everyone was very open about, it's all open to interpretation. It's what you think it is. It's what you feel. And I also felt there was just so many connections you could make with the things around you. And paintings or sculptures you could look at, and you could just, there's a feeling, you just get moved because you somehow can connect to it because of something that it represents in your life or in your life experience. And I think that's what's so beautiful. I think museums can be such a unique experience for everyone, and every experience is unique from the other.
Exactly. And it's an experience that gets renewed.
Yes.
With the different exhibitions that
absolutely.
happen.
I've visited the same museum, 10, 20 times over. And every time I see something I didn't notice before, or something I would have ignored the first time thinking, I have no interest in this. But in a year or two, something's happened in my life that now when I look at that object, now it does have meaning for me.
Yes.
And so that's also such a beautiful feeling. You start to continue to learn. And I think the greatest gift in life is to have the opportunity to continue to learn.
Yeah, Absolutely. Amazing. Well said. We're very well said. In the studio with us right now, we have the pleasure of hearing from directly Her Excellency, the Director General of Sharjah Museums Authority. Talking museums, why are they important in our lives? The numerous museums that are here in Sharjah, the amazing initiatives, the amazing programs and exhibitions that they have going on. So keep it right here on Lifebeats on Pulse 95 for more.
Lifebeats with Sally Musa, only on Pulse 95.
In conversation with Her Excellency Manal Ataya, the Director General of Sharjah Museums Authority. I was just telling you, Your Excellency, that it's interesting because when I was younger, I have a deep passion for art. When I was younger, I was about 6 years old when I first saw an exhibition by the Palestinian artist Ismail Shammout. And it blew me away. I was about 6, and seeing his works, because they're huge.
Yes.
Some of them are wall size.
And very powerful. Yeah.
Very powerful. And, you know, he has the beautiful women with the oud and, you know, they in the beautiful thobs. But then he also has the very, the visceral paintings that depict, life under occupation.
Yes, exactly. And the conflict. Yeah.
And so seeing that so young, I will never forget it. And I know that Sharjah Museums had an exhibition.
Yes,
recently.
We did. Yeah, last year we have a lasting impression series, which is a very, I think, important exhibition that I would hope everyone, if they ever make a time to come see the museums, try to see that one. Every year we highlight an Arab artist, one that has an established career, usually 30 plus years, have been working and basically have left a lasting impression, hence the name. And I think it's an important exhibition because it really is the platform to support Arab artists in the region and internationally. Ismail Shammout, for example, the late Ismail Shammout and his wife, Tamam al-Akhal, who was here for the opening, we both showed their work together for the first time at this scale. And it was really beautiful because, like you said, there's so much wonderful work that celebrates the Palestinian culture, its folklore, and the beauty of the landscape, but also at the same time highlights the plight of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian diaspora, conflict, war, and what that has done. But in spite of all of that, their message is always for the hope for return or hope for peace. And I think all those messages, whether you saw it when you were a child and maybe didn't pick up on all of them, see how wonderful it is that over your life, and then maybe to see it at this time in your life, the meanings of those paintings will have a completely different impact, but also how you evolve your understanding of these things. And I think that's the beauty of art in general. And I always tell people who tell me I'm not interested in art or it's not my thing, I said, you just haven't found the thing that moves you. My sister, who's one of the closest people to me, would always be bored to death when I take her to some museums that I have of particular artists that I used to like. And we once went to Kandinsky show, the Russian artist Kandinsky, and she was like, now this is art that I like, that I understand. And she was completely, thrown by it. And I said to her, you see, you just hadn't found what you liked. And since then, she has continued to look for things that she has interest in, and her eyes and her mind has opened to a lot of new experiences. So I always tell people at any age, and this, by the way, happened in her late 20s. So at any age, you can come into a museum and hopefully you will find something that you'll be interested in, that will move you, that will excite you, and it could take you on a whole new adventure and journey in your life. And I think that's what we live for in our museums.
I'm kind of in shock that you said Kandinsky, because he's also
one of your favorites
for me. Blue Mountain, that was just his that work. We have to post it somewhere, because that work, it was kind of between his impressionism moving into abstraction.
Yes, exactly.
But that is one of my favorite works.
She loved the sort of dynamic part of his work. It looked there's like a lot of motion and energy.
Very kinetic.
Yes, and she loved that. And everyone finds something that just makes sense to them, whereas a lot of things probably I saw before were much more solemn and melancholic, because that's what I like. So, and just very simple patches of color And like Itel Adnan, for example, I love her work. So people like that, for me mean something, and I get excited by it. But it doesn't stop me from looking at artists that I look at and think, oh, I don't particularly like their work, but I still go and see it. Because I think you have to always open yourself to new experiences, always, because you never know what you're going to find, and you never know how something you think isn't you or what you're interested in will actually link to something else later in life.
Yeah.
And those connections are always fascinating. I look back and think, oh, I didn't particularly like this artist, or even, I don't know, this archaeological exhibition, but now 10 years later I see that actually that's connected to my heritage or my culture, and it's a wonderful I think feeling of it's like an aha moment, I guess, right? You start to say, oh my God, these little dots connect somehow.
Exactly. Yeah. Your worlds begin to connect.
Yes, yeah. And you make more meaning of life, right?
Exactly. Absolutely spot on. And that is the thing, even if it's not something that you connected throughout your own life, but then, as we visit museums, as we experience this, we're opened up, exactly as you said, to whole new worlds that we didn't know existed, that we didn't know how they functioned, that we didn't know. When you see a painting or a piece up close or an artifact, it takes you into that world. You are now part of that world. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can think about it in so many different levels. From an aesthetic point of view is one, but even from a technical point of view. I mean, now I look at things and I'm often curious about how they're made, which wasn't the case before. I would just look at things, oh, that looks beautiful. Oh no, that's not very nice for me. But now it's always like, how did that artist create that? Or how did that person create this experience? I'm fascinated by the process of thinking and the engineering sometimes to make things. It's just unbelievable. And like Muna Saudi, for example, was an artist we showed. She's a Jordanian artist who does sculptures made from stone. And when I saw videos of how she actually creates them, it's just fascinating and unbelievable. She literally has chisels, and you have to be so perfect that if you just move even a millimeter away, you have ruined it. I mean, you have to be so disciplined and so and almost you have to see it when it's not even there. So she has literally a lump of stone, but she sees the sculpture in there and she knows how to make it appear. It's really unbelievable. I love that. And these are the things that we look for when we go into the museums, and the things that we experience and learn more about, which are fascinating and inspiring. Yes. And makes you think that can spark a whole new idea. Yes. And a whole new direction.
An appreciation, really, for
appreciation. Yeah. Absolutely. I want to, coming up next after the break, Your Excellency, I want you to talk more about the amazing collaboration that we had with Sharjah Art Museums and the Vatican. Yes. So that you may know one another. That is an exhibition that happened in 2014.
Yes, correct.
But now, of course, today, this week, we do have the Pope visiting the UAE for the very first time. So it all ties in so perfectly. It was an exhibition that went to Australia as well, which makes me very excited as an Aussie. But there's so much to talk about. How do you make museums more accessible to young people? And what makes a great museum experience? We have a lot to talk about with Her Excellency Manal Ataya from Sharjah Museums Authority on Lifebeats on Pulse 95.
Lifebeats with Sally Musa, only on Pulse 95.
Yes, we are back with Her Excellency Manal Ataya, the Director General of Sharjah Museums Authority. Now, this verse from the Quran became the name of one of the exhibitions that not only happened at Sharjah Museums in 2014, but was taken all over the world and has so much meaning today. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. O humankind, indeed, we have created you from a male and a female and made you into nations and tribes that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you. Indeed, Allah is all-knowing and acquainted. Your Excellency, tell us about this particular exhibition, which was a collaboration, in fact, with the Vatican. It was a unique, unprecedented exhibition from the Vatican featuring artifacts and material culture of Muslim communities the world over that happened in 2014.
Yes.
Amazing.
Well, yes, I have to admit it was a really unbelievable exhibition to work on, because definitely there is there was a misunderstanding or miseducation. When I remember we talked about it initially, people said, "You mean there's Muslim material culture in the Vatican? Are you sure? Maybe it's Christian." I said, "No, it's Muslim material culture." That's correct, because people didn't understand why the Vatican would have Muslim material culture, and I think that was why we said we need to bring this exhibition, because we want to highlight that different places in the world and different religions in the world have always, appreciated and gave value to material culture of other religions as well. And that is what we should strive for. So where extremism has caused people to destroy material culture of our own or others, this is absolutely wrong. And it is a human rights violation, in my opinion. So for us, it's always important to say human culture, every material culture of any culture or religion is, in essence, for mankind. It's for humankind. So we all should believe it or see it as world culture and world heritage that we should all protect together. And I think this exhibition was really special because the Vatican museums had, in 500 years since it was created, this particular museum, they had never shown this material before, and we were able to bring it for the first time and show it for the first time in their history in a Muslim country. So it's a lot of firsts and a lot of uniques for this exhibition. And what was special about it too was that because of that, we had to work together to select the items, but also to conserve them. So there was a lot of work to take care of items that, and why we say that is because people might not know this, but the Vatican does have over 40,000 objects, which is a lot of objects. So you can imagine a lot of them are still needing to be cataloged, archived, etc. So this was a really special project to find, a number of beautiful items, bring them to Sharjah, and talk about this wonderful relationship between the Vatican and the Muslim world, but also how, at the time, why it was even collected. People asked. Well, Pope Pio in 1925, he wanted to put on an exhibition. He was very interested in letting people know that the Catholicism and the Catholic Church were open, and they were respectful of other cultures because they were all over the world at that time. So many people donated items to this exhibition, which ran for a year, and over 1 million people saw this. And it had a huge impact. And thankfully, because of that, and then later some people who donated, either private collectors and other people who had worked in Shanghai in a religious capacity or at an embassy, etc., they would send over things that they collected as things that they thought was interesting from that culture, and then the collection grew. So we were lucky to bring about 70 objects to Sharjah. And we did that on the occasion of Sharjah being given the accolade of capital of Islamic culture in 2014, which was really special. And I think that also highlights the fact that for such a special occasion, we chose to work again with the Vatican. I think it was something that we were really blessed that His Highness had great relations with them already, including relationships with them through their libraries and their archives. And because of that, and through those discussions, they said, we actually have some material culture from the Muslim world. And he said, that's amazing. We would love to have it in Sharjah if you would like to bring it. And they said, really? And he said, yes. And that's how it all started. And then I got a call saying, you need to go to the Vatican. And I thought, really? Why? And he said, there's all this wonderful material there. And it was a shock to me because nobody knew about it up until that point. So it was a very special exhibition. We ran it for 3 months. It did really well. And we had a lot of interest from other countries. And as you said earlier before the break, we were lucky then to bring it to Australia 2 years later, showing it last year in Canberra. And we hope to take it to maybe 2 locations. Probably another European city, and perhaps even a city in China.
This is just amazing. It's really amazing because there is a number of things here obviously these are collections that were unknown before this.
Absolutely, yes.
And, it just goes to show the cultural exchange that happens, because a lot of people think the Muslim world is here.
Yes.
In the Middle East, in the Arab world, and kind of completely forget about the fact that the Muslim world exists everywhere, and cultures and religions exist everywhere.
Exactly, which is why having objects from as far as, Spain, Sicily, West Africa, Indonesia, China was so important, because it showed that it's a lot more expansive than people think, but also how interesting it is to see that these material cultures that were that we showcase. So, for example, ethnographic items, whether they're a saddle or shoes or a pot, a ceramic bowl, all of these things, in many cases, were not produced in areas that had any political conquest, Islamic conquest per se. These were generated in countries where it was completely based on trade and mixing with one another through trade. So trade would go through to different parts of Asia and up into China. People would settle. People would learn to speak what was the most common language, which was Arabic in many cases, and then that's what would start to proliferate into those communities. People would start to convert, and you'd have small, Islamic communities in China and smaller ones in Indonesia, and then in Mindanao and Philippines, for example. And then they grew and grew over time. But these were never places that, the Ottoman Empire went to. This is completely based on people moving and migration, which is always such an interesting topic for me, and one that we're doing now with the current exhibition in the Islamic Museum, about how the movement of people has always been the greatest thing that could happen on Earth, because when people move from one place to another, there's so much great positive impact that has, from transferring knowledge, transferring techniques and technology, from learning about one another and becoming more understanding, and we talk about empathy and also just finding a way to create new things and evolve as well. If we all were separated by borders and no one ever crossed over, I think we wouldn't have a very interesting life right now. So it's so important to know that migrations, people bringing food, culture, music, technology, language, all kinds of things have great impacts on the communities that they bring them to, and how people use them, adapt them, take parts of them, modify, etc. And I think it's a really beautiful thing to see that. And in the objects that we showed, you can see such beautiful, sometimes interconnectedness of two different cultures, and others where something that was produced in one country became something that moved to another.
Give us like a couple of examples.
So, for example, like in terms of migration, like one of the objects we had was the lute. So the lute is a type of instrument which is still used today, 5,000 years later. But the one that we had was created in Morocco. And what's wonderful about the lute is that although it was produced in Morocco and was mostly predominantly used in the Arab world and in North Africa, it moved through to southern Spain and then Sicily and then to Europe, and became one of the most used instruments in the Middle Ages in Europe. And so a lot of people who know the lute, and if you ever watch movies and you hear this sort of interesting sound, which is always used in movies like that, it's actually a lute. People think it's a European instrument, but actually it's not. Yeah. So this is how music and instruments moved to different countries and became used and adapted into the musical repertoire of other cultures, which is really fascinating.
What was the response? I want to ask you about the response in Australia to this exhibition.
Well, see, for Australia, for example, they were really interested in bringing it for a number of reasons. But one of them they said was that, in Australia, for example, I'm not sure exactly the numbers, but I know that even though the percentage of Australians in Australia is relatively small, it is growing quite a lot. So in 5 years, it grew 15 or 20%, which is huge. So they were interested to sort of find a way to reach that an audience that they don't normally reach, but that's growing and that's relevant and important to them. But also because of general misinformation, miseducation, and the media's unfortunate focus on extremism and a lot of news that is inaccurate, or let's say tells one small part of a story of a whole civilization and peoples, has made people fear Islam and fear Muslim communities, or at least regard them with a bit of suspect, and they're unsure, and they think that maybe they don't belong here, and maybe they won't ever really be part of this country, and all these sort of like racist undertones, I think, are ones that they were concerned with, which is really wonderful. That other countries who really need to work on this aren't at the moment, but they were very sensitive to this, and they said we want to sort of deal with this now before it gets worse, because there are a lot of forces out there that are pushing a really terrible agenda out there, and a lot of people are susceptible to it. So it's important to continue to educate people and to continue to fight those forces with knowledge, with experience. And one of the things they did, of course, is have a lot of programs, not alongside the exhibition, where people got to meet the Muslim community, and they got to talk to them and have discussions and dialogue. And that's really important for people to break down some of their stereotypes and misinformation that they have. And that's what we need, basically.
Absolutely. It couldn't be better timing. So congratulations on doing that.
Thank you.
Because that was amazing. Watching it from here, I wasn't there, but I felt incredibly proud at that moment to see that happening at the Australian National Museum. And it just goes to show that's why the exhibition is called So That You May Know One Another.
Yes, and
it's essential.
Absolutely. And I think one thing to really focus when you mentioned that ayah earlier, two things. That beginning of that ayah starts with Ayyuhan Nas, and that's very important, which is human, all kind, or all peoples.
Kind.
Yes, it's not directed to Muslims or any. It says everyone, so it is a message for everyone. And two, the word that is used in that verse also is not that we created men and women and tribes so that you will tolerate one another. The word is to get to know one another. So there's a big difference between using the word tasamuh and the word ta'aruf, and I think that's also important, because tolerance, as much as I know it's used in a positive sense, the origins of the word come from being able to tolerate something because it bothers you, or it has a bit of a it's you tolerate bad weather, or you tolerate mosquitoes at night when you're sleeping.
You do the bare minimum.
Yes, but getting to know or appreciating, or even in the best sense celebrating is where you hope to reach. These are ways in which you're doing more than just saying, okay, I understand the person next to me is a different culture, a different religion. I'll let them do what they want, and I'll do what I want, and that's tolerance. That's not tolerance for me. Tolerance should be more than that. It should be the part that we mentioned: getting to know one another, accepting and understanding one another, and having this empathy for one another to realize that we all have maybe different views on things, but there's a lot. At the end of the day, there's a lot that we have in common that outweighs what divides us. And I think that's the main thing. And you won't know that unless you talk to people and you sit with them and you get to know them, and you enjoy things that they do. I mean, for example, I'm taking my family out this weekend for Chinese New Year. We're not Chinese. We never lived in China. But I thought, this is wonderful. Why not take part in something that a couple billion people are taking part of in the world? Get to try some of the food, get to understand some of the customs that people do in Chinese New Year. It's wonderful. So, and maybe learn a few words. This is getting to know people and meet people, because we'll meet a lot of people there who will be Chinese, and it'll be a nice chance to have a bit of a cultural exchange.
It's wonderful. I love it so much. But just in the last few minutes, let's talk a little bit about your efforts to make museums more accessible to young people who are living out in rural areas. This is a wonderful program, Museums Express.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So this initiative was one that I've actually dreamt about for about 4 years. And then 2 years ago, I started to put it in motion. I had always believed, because we started our initiative of Museums Accessible for All a few years ago, and the accessibility aspect of it was very sort of this, or let's say the three prongs were accessibility physically, accessibility intellectually, and accessibility financially. Those are really three important things. So people should be able to come to museums either for free or for very low cost. Two, people should be able to come intellectually, that they can understand what they're looking at to a certain extent, and that they're not going to go somewhere and feel like, oh my God, I'm intimidated because I don't understand the labels. I don't understand what the person has written in the introduction. It needs to be written for people who can really understand it, or have people like guides, etc., who can explain and tell stories about the objects. And three, we mentioned the physical access, which is making sure that all people with special needs and disabilities are able to come into the museum and take part as much as anyone else. So those were really important to us. And having said that about accessibility, one thing that I was thinking about, who else are we missing out on? And I thought, you know what, besides missing out on people abroad, which is perhaps maybe the next initiative, which is a virtual museum, that people can access, at collections online. Right now, I thought, what about all these students and young people and communities who live outside of city centers? And they're not just in Sharjah, they're in all other emirates, in the UAE. They don't get to come to museums because it takes them an hour, 2 hours or longer each way to come to the city center. So that's a lot to ask for a lot of people and for schools to logistically get that many children on a bus for that long. So, and we did speak to them. They said, yes, it's just we're not allowed to do it. And of course, we can't have kids on the bus that long. It's dangerous. It costs money for the petrol, etc. So I said, you know what? We'll just bring it to you. I won't accept that they won't be able to experience this. So I decided to look at how we could do that. And the idea was, okay, let's have this maybe mobile bus that would bring collections to the students. But then I had to think a little bit more about, well, what kind of collections? We have so many, we mentioned earlier. What could they be? And then we decided that it would be collections that I felt that could best bring out the creative aspect of students. So creativity, creative thinking, and innovation, which I think ties into, of course, the UAE strategy for innovation, I think was key to get students and schools to believe in this project. And so far, it's been really successful. Kids have, for the first time, seen a lot of the objects. They've never seen them before. Many students, we asked them, have you been to a museum before? Out of a class of 20, only one said yes. And so this was so special that I said, wow, finally they're getting to see this. And that now that they've seen it, they're like, we want to come. We're going to bring our families. We're going to encourage them to let us come a little bit more often. And they're actually doing workshops as well. So it's not just looking at the objects, but to actually have a hands-on workshop on different aspects, but mainly art workshops, which has been really helpful. And I think it gives the experience, something a bit more tangible as well for the students than just looking. But they get to hear about the objects from a wonderful guide, and then they get to have the workshop as well.
It's phenomenal. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're making it available to everybody, which is just wonderful. This is what we want to see, but we've run out of time.
Yes, that's well, it was wonderful to be here and share this with you. But I do hope you can all, check out our social media handles, Sharjah Museums on Twitter, on Instagram as well,
Facebook.
And you'll find out a lot about what's going on. Our programs, our website as well is always up to date with our community programs and exhibitions.
How did they get to it? Sharjahmuseums.org, I believe.
.ae.
.ae.
Yes.
Okay, Sharjahmuseums.ae.
Yes.
You can find all of the museums there.
Yes,
and
exactly.
What's going
How
on.
to get there and all that's going on. And there's a lot happening with the Sharjah Biennial opening. Yay for Sharjah Art Biennial. They're working really hard, and they'll be opening on March 9.
We're going to have you back.
Yes, I hope so.
To talk about it, really, because we didn't get to it today, but just incredible things to come from Sharjah Museums.
Always.
Your Excellency Manal Ataya, what an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. The pleasure's mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us here on Lifebeats on Pulse 95. And that's it for us today. Join us again tomorrow for another great show. If you missed this conversation with Her Excellency, it will be up. The podcast will be up, and you can listen back to that. So much going on. We are so proud of it here at Pulse 95.
Life Beats with Sally Musa, only on Pulse 95.